I was 34 years old the week I learned what my parents thought my signature was worth. $50,000, 4 attorneys, and a conference room they booked under someone else's name. I audit estates for a living. I know exactly what people are worth on paper, and I know exactly what they think they're owed. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts and family learns that boundaries have a price. If stories about dignity, documents, and consequences are your thing, drop a comment and subscribe. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is my title. Certified Forensic Accountant, 14 years, specializing in estate disputes and trust litigation. I spend my days reading what people actually intended, not what their families wish they'd intended. Changes how you see a family. You stop hearing love language. You start hearing account balances. I married young at 26 to a man named Eli who fixed pipe organs for a living, an occupation so specific it used to make people laugh at parties. He was quiet in the way old buildings are quiet, like the silence had been earned. We had 6 years together before the aneurysm took him on a Tuesday in March, standing in our kitchen, coffee still warm on the counter. I kept the mug. I still have it. My family orbited a different kind of gravity. My father built a contracting business from nothing, and my mother ran the house like a ledger she never let anyone else read. My younger sister, Marissa, was the golden entry, the one whose overages were always forgiven, whose debts were quietly absorbed into the family's larger accounts. And me, I was the one who showed up, who paid the deposit when the caterer needed it early, who covered Dad's equipment loan the year the business almost folded, who never asked for a ledger of my own because I didn't think I needed one. There's a phrase in my field, implied consideration. It means something changes hands without anyone naming the price, and later everyone disagrees about what was owed. That was the arithmetic my family ran on me for 30 years. I gave. They received. No one wrote it down. I thought that was love. I didn't understand yet that unwritten debts are the ones people call in hardest, because there's no paper to argue with. The betrayal started on a Thursday in September, 4 months after Eli's death, with a phone call from my mother that opened not with condolences but with a number. Marissa's venue wants the deposit by Friday, she said. $50,000 total for everything. We think it's only fair you cover it. I asked her what fair meant in this context, because in my line of work, fairness is a documented standard, not a feeling. She said, "You have Eli's life insurance now. You don't need all of it." I didn't respond right away. I have a habit, professional, not personal, of writing down exact language the moment someone says something that will matter later. I opened the Notes app on my phone while she was still talking and typed, September 11th, 4:52 p.m. Mom, you don't need all of it. I've learned that people reveal their real ledger when they think no one's counting. 2 days later, my father sent a text that read verbatim, "We raised you to take care of family. This is what that means now." I screenshotted it, filed it in a folder I'd already, without quite admitting it to myself, titled Family Documentation. The following week, Marissa came to my house for the first time since the funeral, not to see how I was doing, but to show me a binder of venue photos and ask, in the same breath as "How are you holding up?" whether I preferred the cream tablecloths or the ivory ones, since I'd be the one paying for them anyway. I sat with that binder open on my lap for a long time after she left. I didn't cry. I read the fine print on the venue contract she'd left behind, a habit, not a choice, and I found the deposit deadline, the cancellation clause, and the fact that my parents' names weren't on it anywhere. Only mine apparently was expected to be. The discovery came 10 days later, in an office with recessed lighting and a box of tissues no one had touched, across a desk from Eli's estate attorney, a methodical man named Whitfield who spoke the way documents read, precisely without padding. He told me Eli had amended his trust 18 months before he died. I hadn't known. He hadn't mentioned it, not out of secrecy, but because Eli was the kind of man who fixed things quietly and let you discover later that they'd been broken. The amendment moved the bulk of his estate, the life insurance, the house, the small rental property he'd inherited from his own father, into a trust with a single condition attached. The funds were designated for our life, defined explicitly as expenses related to the continuation of the household we built together, and were not to be distributed to extended family, gifted, or loaned without triggering a forfeiture clause that would redirect the remainder to a music conservatory. Scholarship fund in his name. Whitfield read the clause twice slowly so I could absorb it. I asked him to read it a third time. I wanted the exact words, not my memory of them. Not to be distributed to extended family, gifted, or loaned. Eli had written a wall around me before he died, and he'd never told me he was building it. The second revelation was smaller and cut deeper. Tucked in the file was a letter, handwritten, dated the same day as the trust amendment. Whitfield handed it to me and left the room. It was 4 sentences long. The third one said, "I've watched them treat your generosity like a subscription they never have to renew. Let this be the year you stop paying for a family that only bills you when they need something." I read it 3 times before I could stand up. I didn't call my parents that week. I didn't call them the week after. I went back to work. I filed the trust documents where I could find them quickly, and I waited because in my profession you never move on incomplete information, and I did not yet have a full accounting of what my family believed they were owed. I didn't have to wait long to find out. Within 2 weeks, the pressure campaign began in earnest, small at first, then unmistakable. My mother started a group text with the subject line "Wedding Budget Final," which included a spreadsheet. My sister had built a spreadsheet with a line item labeled simply "Sister's Contribution," $50,000, already filled in, already treated as confirmed. My father called to mention, almost in passing, that he'd told the venue it was handled. Marissa posted a countdown on social media captioned "Dream Wedding, thanks to family who show up," and tagged me. Then came the visit. My father arrived unannounced on a Sunday evening, sat at my kitchen table, the same table Eli used to sit at with sheet music spread across it, and told me without preamble that it's family money, not yours alone, and that Eli would have wanted his own family taken care of. I let the sentence sit in the room for a moment. Then I asked him one question. Which family specifically did he write into his trust? He didn't have an answer. He changed the subject to the venue deadline. I let him leave without giving him one either. That night I called my attorney, not Whitfield, my own, and said 4 words, "Send the letters now." If you've ever watched people who couldn't spare one afternoon during your worst year suddenly clear their whole calendar the moment money entered the conversation, you already know exactly where this story is going. Stick with me. 2 weeks later, my mother invited me to what she called a family dinner at my parents' house. A gathering, she said, to sort out the wedding logistics as a family together. I knew before I walked in that it wasn't a dinner. I'd learned, through a cousin who couldn't keep a secret, that my parents had hired an attorney, and that attorney had brought 3 colleagues, apparently to make the meeting feel less like a request and more like a proceeding. I accepted the invitation anyway. I brought a folder. It was thin deliberately. I arrived to find the dining room rearranged. The table had been extended with a card table pushed against the end, and 4 strangers in business casual were already seated, papers in front of them, coffee going cold. My mother introduced them as, "Just people helping us think this through." I already knew, from the letterhead visible on the papers across the table, exactly which firm they'd retained, And I already knew, because I'd made a call that morning, that the firm specialized in family mediation, not litigation. They weren't there to sue me. They were there to intimidate me into signing something before I understood what I was signing. My father opened with a speech. He talked about legacy, about what family means, about how Eli, and here he used Eli's name like a key he thought would open a door, would be disappointed to see this family fractured over money. My mother added that I'd always been the strong one, which in our family's dialect meant the one expected to absorb the cost of everyone else's comfort. Marissa said nothing. She looked at the tablecloth samples still sitting in her bag by the door. When my father finished, he looked at me the way you look at someone you expect to nod. I asked for the floor. They gave it to me because they assumed I was about to surrender. I opened the folder. I placed the first item on the table, a printed copy of my mother's text. "You don't need all of it." I read the date and time aloud, then slid it toward her. I said nothing else. I let the sentence do the work it had always been capable of doing. Next, my father's text. "We raised you to take care of family. This is what that means now." I placed it beside hers. "You said this 11 days after my husband's funeral," I said, my voice at the same volume it had been the entire evening. "I want that timeline on the record, since there are attorneys present." One of the 4 lawyers shifted in his seat. I noted it and continued. I laid down the venue contract next, the one Marissa had left in my living room, with the deposit deadline circled and the line where my parents' names should have been and weren't. "This obligates no one at this table except whoever signs it," I said. "No one has signed it." The room's temperature was already changing. My mother's expression moved from confident to unsettled. I placed the 4th item, the trust summary Whitfield had prepared, redacted only where it concerned unrelated bequests, on the table and read the operative clause aloud slowly, the way Whitfield had read it to me. Not to be distributed to extended family, gifted or loaned, under penalty of forfeiture to the named scholarship fund. My father said, "That's absurd, that can't be legal," and one of the 4 attorneys, quietly unable to help himself, said, "It's an enforceable spendthrift provision. It's very legal." My father looked at him like he'd been paid to say the opposite. The room escalated the way rooms do when they run out of leverage. My mother's voice rose first, soft accusations about how I was punishing them for grieving badly. Then Marissa, louder, said I was hiding behind a dead man's paperwork. Then my father, loudest, said the word lawsuit, which made 2 of his own attorneys visibly wince, because they clearly hadn't been told that was the plan. I answered each escalation with a quieter sentence than the one before it. By the time my father was shouting, I was speaking just above a whisper, and the room had to lean in to hear me, which is its own kind of power. Into that quiet, I placed the last item on the table, Eli's letter, photocopied, the original safe at home. I didn't read the whole thing. I read one line. "Let this be the year you stop paying for a family that only bills you when they need something." No one spoke for a long moment. It was my father's brother, my Uncle Ray, sitting at the far end of the table where he'd said almost nothing all evening, who finally broke the silence. "She's right," he said quietly, not looking at my parents. "I told you this would happen someday." It wasn't an apology, and I didn't treat it like one. A conscience arriving 11 years too late doesn't get to collect interest on my forgiveness. I stood up. I closed the folder, though I left the letter's photocopy on the table, face up, because I wanted it to be the last thing anyone in that room looked at after I left. I said one sentence before I walked out. "I've spent 30 years being the family's line of credit. Consider this account closed." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I'd already gotten everything the evening had to offer. In the weeks that followed, the practical matters resolved themselves the way documents always do, cleanly on paper, regardless of how loudly anyone had shouted in a dining room. My parents' attorneys, once they understood the trust's spendthrift provision was airtight and that no lawsuit would survive first contact with it, quietly withdrew. The $50,000 was never paid. Marissa's wedding proceeded on a budget assembled from a smaller venue and a shorter guest list, $22,000 all told, funded by my parents themselves, which turned out to be an amount they'd apparently had access to the entire time. My mother and I speak twice a year now at holidays, in sentences that stay carefully on the surface. My father and I haven't spoken since that dinner. I understand that may be permanent, and I've made my peace with the arithmetic of that loss the same way I make peace with any final number, by accepting that it's final. Marissa sent one email 3 months later that read only, "I hope you're doing okay." I didn't answer it. Some debts don't get forgiven just because the person finally notices they exist. Uncle Ray of everyone is the one who still calls, mostly to talk about nothing, which is its own quiet form of amends. Eli's letter lives in a small frame now, on the shelf beside the coffee mug I never washed. Not displayed for guests, I don't have people over much these days, but visible to me every morning where I can see it while the coffee brews. It isn't a trophy. It's a reminder of the one person who saw the ledger my family never let me read, and balanced it for me before he even knew he was dying. I didn't take his money and call it revenge. I funded, instead, the scholarship the trust would have redirected to automatically, except I didn't wait for the forfeiture clause to trigger it. I called the conservatory myself and asked how to expand it. 2 organ repair apprenticeships a year in his name, for students who couldn't otherwise afford the training. That felt less like consequence and more like continuation. He fixed things quietly his whole life. It seemed right that his name should keep doing that without me. People ask me sometimes, in the careful way people ask about family rifts, whether I regret how that dinner ended. I tell them the truth. I didn't end anything that night. I simply stopped extending credit on an account that was never going to be repaid. Boundaries aren't the end of a relationship. They're just the first honest accounting it's ever received. If this reminded you that quiet people keep the receipts, and that boundaries are allowed even with blood, take that as your sign. Update what needs updating. Say the thing you've been keeping in a folder in your head. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.